The sky fractured at noon. Over New Oslo, a dense gray hung low, pierced by something unnatural. Not quite metal, not quite stone. The alien vessel didn't descend with grandeur or ceremony. It simply arrived, like a verdict rendered before a trial. No propulsion. No visible openings. No explanation. In the city square, people stared upward, phones in hand, mouths ajar. The object's surface appeared to ripple slightly, reflecting only the faintest hints of the world beneath it. It cast no shadow but muted all sound beneath it, as if absorbing noise for analysis. The global broadcast hit every screen. Televisions, tablets, smart glasses, even digital watches. The symbol that replaced all programming was an eye enclosed in a rotating lattice, geometric and strangely organic. No one recognized it. No one had to. It pulsed with intent. Then came the voice, layered, synthetic, and unsettling in its calm precision. This planet has triggered Interference Clause 7 Delta. Accord presence is now active. Governance will be enforced. Non-compliance will not be tolerated. The feed ended. Seconds later, the first enforcement drones descended, not from the mothership, but from the stratosphere, where they'd apparently been waiting in stasis. They resembled insect husks, elongated and semi-translucent, their limbs twitching with unnatural rhythm. One appeared outside a government building in Sao Paulo and, without warning, erased 3 guards using a column of blue light. Not vaporized, erased, as if edited from the scene. In Johannesburg, markets were flooded with floating projectors displaying untranslated laws. When sellers failed to comply, their stalls collapsed into foam. In Tokyo, trains stopped running. Not a single error message. Just power rerouted elsewhere. Entire rail lines repurposed for alien infrastructure. No consultation. No apology. At first, world leaders issued the expected statements. Unity, calm, contact being established. But no dialogue came. Every attempt to communicate was absorbed by the same message. You are governed. Adapt. On the periphery of all this, buried in the Yukon's vast emptiness, an old radar station flickered back to life. The compound, long abandoned after the last solar monitoring project had failed, was now home to a disparate group of minds. Some official, most not. Van, once an Air Force technician turned independent system scavenger, had taken up residence months before the arrival. He wasn't a leader in the traditional sense. No one had voted him in, and he didn't command authority. But he had foresight. And equipment. We've been flagged, he said to the dozen gathered in the compound's subterranean comms chamber. Not invaded, audited. Like we're a system that needs patching. Yara stood near the fractured remains of an enforcement drone they'd recovered near Edmonton. She had grown up dissecting code more than conversations, but even she couldn't hide her unease. They're not punishing us, she said quietly. They're optimizing us. No more borders, no more politics, no more mess. They're writing over our species like bad code. An older woman named Dr. Hevra, a former UN policy analyst now scraping by as an illegal interpreter of alien transmissions, adjusted her glasses. I've translated part of their standard regulation package. What we're seeing isn't conquest. It's bureaucratic saturation. We're being brought into compliance with something. A law library as long as our oceans. And if we resist? Asked a voice in the dark, someone new, someone young. They don't destroy, said Van. They overwrite. The room went silent except for the hum of outdated generators struggling to keep up with the data influx. Van stepped toward a flickering monitor displaying live feeds from surveillance drones they'd launched the day the mothership arrived. They expect us to yield. Quietly. Efficiently. They think humans can't function without a structure imposed on us. He turned toward the others. Let's prove them wrong. Yara traced the glyph again, fingers gliding over the curved indent on the drone's casing. The material wasn't metal, not as humans understood it. It shifted under pressure, like it was responding to thought instead of touch. And the glyph, a spiral crossed by 4 lines, kept appearing in every Accord directive intercepted over the last 2 days. It's a compliance marker, she murmured. They're tagging sectors, provinces, maybe species. Across the room, Van sat hunched over an array of ancient radio transceivers and modern splices. Analog signals were the only ones the Accord hadn't blocked or bent to their control. For now. They're cataloging Earth like a warehouse, he muttered. Temperature zones, behavior clusters, economic inputs. We're not citizens in their eyes. We're inventory. Dr. Hevra entered with a cracked tablet clutched to her chest, still displaying what she called judgment clauses in translated Accord syntax. Her voice was dry and flat. They've issued us a grace period. 30 days to self-regulate under Accord standards. Meaning? Van asked. Meaning, we rewrite our laws to match theirs. Abandon judicial systems. Enforce Accord conduct. And they'll avoid directed assimilation. Their term. Assimilation like implanting things. Assimilation like control of reproductive logistics, nutrition assignment, behavioral scheduling, labor zoning, and kin separation based on neurocompatibility. Yara stared. They want to redesign our families? They already are, Hevra replied. Check Santiago. They've sectioned it by genome clusters. Van didn't speak for a long time. The only sound was the click-click of the magnetic relay in the old radar tower's antenna array as it tried endlessly to realign with a satellite long since captured by Accord subroutines. Then he turned to the others. We've got one advantage they didn't plan for. Yara looked up. Stubbornness. No, he said. Redundancy. Our systems don't run on a single logic structure. We've got fractured governments, outdated infrastructure, rogue networks. It's a mess, yeah. But it's a mess they can't patch. Every time they impose one rule, another part of the system breaks in a different way. And that costs them. He gestured to the map overhead, the one Hevra had manually updated using civilian intel and drone footage. Red marks showed lockdown zones. Orange showed active restructuring. But in green, sparse and scattered, were the gaps. Places the Accord couldn't fully reach. Northern Mongolia. Southern Appalachia. The old fiber lines under the Gobi. Fishing towns off the Scottish coast still using barter. These are our blind spots. They're blind spots. Hevra raised an eyebrow. You want to organize resistance from goat-herding villages and patchwork communes? Exactly, Van said. We build a network they can't flatten. Not a military. A signal. Something decentralized. Irrational to them but familiar to us. They'll retaliate, Yara warned. You saw what happened in Dakar. They sent heat drones over one community farm. Vaporized the entire water table. Then we stay mobile, Van replied. We don't form armies. We form rumors. Stories. Fragments. If they trace a message to one source, the others go dark. We adapt by not organizing in ways they understand. Yara looked back at the drone glyph again, the spiral with its intersecting lines. They think everything has to follow a pattern. Van nodded. Then we give them something that doesn't. The island wasn't on most maps. Once a military outpost during a forgotten Cold War operation, it had been abandoned after salt air chewed through its communications gear and morale. Now, decades later, its rusting radio towers and collapsed barracks were perfect cover for something new. A child of two worlds sat cross-legged on the concrete. Her name was Hesper, though her parents had long disappeared into an Accord sorting center. She didn't talk much, but when she did, people listened. Her job wasn't strategy. It was sound. Van stood nearby as she adjusted a cable cluster attached to a weather-cracked antenna. She turned one knob, then another, and a low pattern began to hum through the receiver. Not music. Not language. But not noise either. She's pulling raw emissions from Accord drift stations, said Yara, leaning over the console. They broadcast in harmonic intervals, not carrier waves. But Hesper can isolate modulations that shift when they recalibrate the drones. You mean, Van said slowly, she can predict where they're about to strike? More than that, Yara replied. She can interrupt it. The sound cut, replaced by silence, then static. A few seconds later, an urgent ping from the uplink terminal confirmed it. One of the enforcer drones en route to Vladivostok had just lost orientation and plummeted into the Pacific. They're networked like organs, Yara continued. If one drone breaks pattern, the rest pause to correct. That's our window. Elsewhere, in cities and mountain passes, human resistance wasn't coming in the form of battles. Instead, it unfolded in flickers. Market stalls refusing to sell protein paste rations, neighborhoods jamming visual relays with hand-painted symbols, fishermen sending coded messages in the arrangement of their nets. Even churches and temples began to shift. Rituals once spiritual now included Accord disruption patterns, chants that mimicked drone interference tones, incense smoke calibrated to cloud scanner lenses. But not everything went smoothly. In Cologne, an attempted sabotage of a materials refinery ended with 9 locals vanished. No sound, no residue, just a flattened heat signature. In Melbourne, a group broadcasting on pirate frequencies triggered a Sky Monitor event. A massive orb deployed from the mothership, unleashing a pulse that rendered all electronics in a 10-kilometer radius inert. Still, resistance did not slow. It spread. They called it the fracture pattern, a name coined by Hevra, referring to how human resistance never moved as one force. Each group fractured again and again, sometimes unaware of each other but echoing shared tactics, responding to the same unspoken urge, refuse regulation. Even children like Hesper became conduits. She's syncing with the frequency array again, Yara murmured as the girl fine-tuned another panel. She doesn't understand it in words. She just knows how to listen. Van knelt beside Hesper and offered a ration square. She didn't look up, just reached out, took it, and continued working. She's not the future, he said quietly. She's the present, running ahead of the rest of us. Yara tilted her head. You think we have a chance? Van's answer came as a hollow laugh. I don't think in chances. I think in distractions, delays, unreadable variables. That's how we make them unsure. Outside, the ocean churned under moonlight. Far off, the alien vessel still hovered, unmoving, unblinking, vast enough to contain entire cities. But now, for the first time, it rotated slightly. The first sign that it was aware something wasn't going according to schedule. The mothership stopped spinning. For 91 days it had remained suspended. its rotation precise, endless. The shift, only a few degrees, meant nothing to most, but to those listening it was a signal. "They're watching now," said Yara, voice low. "Not reacting. Assessing." The broadcast towers went silent the next day. No more announcements. No regulations. No threats. Just silence. But the drones kept moving, almost aimlessly, crossing the same sectors they'd already scanned. They began to drift from their corridors, scanning trees, stones, abandoned rail stations. "They're uncertain," said Dr. Hevra. "Whatever system governs them, it doesn't know how to process disobedience without hierarchy. Our chaos isn't strategic. It's structural. And it's working." At the old radar station in the Yukon, Van stared at a wall of screens displaying irregular patterns. Pop-up relays blinking in Haiti, grainy footage from a village in central Kyrgyzstan where children played next to a toppled drone carcass, and a scratched field in Montana where a farmer had plowed an anti-sigil into the earth large enough for satellites to see. "We didn't win anything," he said. "We just gave them a migraine." Hevra looked up from her reports. "That might be all we ever could." In Bangkok, a temple broadcasted rhythmic bells that countered accord harmonics. In Alaska, 6 bands of excoders developed a program that, once played through a frequency modulator, made accord guidance systems drift off course, subtly, slowly, causing systems to reroute themselves in endless loops. The most impactful disruption came not from any sanctioned effort but from a shepherd boy near Bursa who had buried an emitter under a nesting cliff. It began echoing local bird calls with microscopic irregularities. 3 Accord scanners spent 16 hours studying them before withdrawing. They weren't designed to understand life without organization. But humans, even unarmed, even scattered, refused patterns. One by one, enforcement drones began returning to the mothership. Some limped, damaged. Others hovered like lost insects, unable to reconnect with their protocols. Then one morning they left. No speech. No message. No final warning. Just departure. The vessel drew upward, silently as always, until it vanished into the upper layers of the atmosphere, beyond human sensors. Satellites resumed operation without interference. The sky returned to its usual disinterest. In the aftermath, governments flailed. Some tried to reassert control. Others collapsed. But from that confusion came something rare, a reimagining. Cities no longer trusted grid structures entirely. Remote communities, long ignored, found their methods suddenly relevant. And in the north, under rusted towers and erratic radio pings, the radar station remained active. Hesper sat alone beside a retooled signal board, watching lines flicker across a faded screen. Not for defense. Not to call for help. She was listening. Not because the Accord would return, but because something else might. And this time Earth would not be cataloged so easily.